Warning: this story contains extreme violence, slasher elements, and murder. I encourage you to listen to the entire story, and if you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe and press the bell icon to stay updated. I knew from the moment I stepped into that decrepit hostel that something wasn't right. The walls were yellowed with age, the floors creaked under the weight of 1,000 forgotten footsteps, and the stench of mildew lingered in the air like a bad memory. But it was the eyes of the other students that unnerved me the most, cold, calculating, predatory. They watched me like vultures eyeing fresh meat, and I knew I was in their territory now. I was the new kid. The outsider. The easy target. "Welcome to your new home," a voice sneered behind me. I turned to see a group of them standing there, Derek, the ringleader, with his smug grin, flanked by his lackeys, Sean and Tyler. They were the kind of guys who thrived on fear, who fed off the pain of others. I forced a smile and tried to walk past them, but Derek grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "What's the rush? We're just getting to know each other." My heart pounded in my chest, but I pulled free and hurried to my room. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, a sound that would haunt me for days to come. It started with whispers, at first, just barely audible as I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. But soon they grew louder, more insistent, like a hive of angry bees swarming in my mind. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, threatening, mocking. I got up, trying to shake the feeling, and that's when I saw it. A note slipped under my door. The handwriting was jagged, almost manic. "We're watching you." A chill ran down my spine. I knew it was them, Derek and his crew. They were trying to scare me, break me. But they didn't know what I was capable of. The next few days were a living nightmare. They sabotaged my belongings, spreading ink across my textbooks, filling my shoes with nails. I found my locker smeared with filth, my bed soaked in urine. The other students turned a blind eye, either out of fear or indifference. It was there. The constant taunting, the relentless harassment. They would whisper in my ear when no one was around, telling me how worthless I was, how they would make my life a living hell until I begged for death. And then there was the laughter. Always that laughter, echoing through the halls, following me everywhere I went. But I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I just waited. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. The whispers in the night grew louder, turning into screams. I started seeing things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, faces leering at me from the darkness. The lines between reality and nightmare blurred until I couldn't tell which was which. But there was one thing I was sure of: revenge. I spent hours in the workshop at the back of the hostel, crafting, sharpening, perfecting. My hands worked with a precision I didn't know I possessed. My mind focused on a single thought: making them pay. It was Derek's laughter that triggered it. That smug, arrogant chuckle that cut through the fog in my brain like a knife. I watched him from the shadows as he and his friends gathered in a common room, drinking, joking, oblivious to the fate that awaited them. The toolbox I carried felt heavy in my hands, but the weight was comforting, a promise of what was to come. I crept closer, my breath steady, my heart calm. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Sean was the first. I approached him from behind as he leaned over the pool table, lining up his shot. The hammer connected with the back of his skull with a sickening crunch. He dropped instantly, blood pooling around his head, his eyes wide with shock. Tyler barely had time to react before I drove the screwdriver into his throat, twisting it as he gurgled and thrashed, his life draining away in a crimson torrent. Derek was the last. He stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the room, illuminating the scene of carnage around me. My clothes were soaked with blood, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline that had surged through me the night before. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at what I had done. The bodies of Derek, Sean, and Tyler were twisted in unnatural poses, their lifeless eyes staring into the void. The smell of death was thick in the air, mingling with the coppery tang of blood. I should have felt something: horror, disgust, even satisfaction. But there was only emptiness, a hollow void where my soul should have been. The sirens grew louder, and I knew they were coming for me. I had no intention of running. There was nowhere to go, nothing left to do. This was the end of the line, but as I stood up, ready to face whatever awaited me, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement in the corner of the room. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to face it. It was impossible. Derek's body, what was left of it, twitched, a spasm running through his mutilated limbs. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but then I saw it again. His hand, or what was left of it, curled into a fist, his head jerking slightly to the side. I took a step back, my mind racing. It wasn't possible. He was dead. They were all dead. I had made sure of it, but then his eyes opened. A low, guttural growl filled the room, a sound that no human throat should have been able to produce. Derek's eyes, those dead, glassy eyes, locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He began to move, his broken body rising from the chair, bones snapping and grinding as he stood. His skin hung in tatters, revealing raw, exposed muscle underneath, yet he moved with a terrifying purpose, his gaze fixed on me. I stumbled backward, tripping over one of the other bodies, my breath coming in ragged gasps from me, a twisted mockery of the boy I had mutilated hours before. Derek took a step toward me, and I saw something glinting in his hand, the scalpel I had used to flay him alive. It was still stained with his blood, his fingers clutching it with unnatural strength. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled to my feet, reaching for the toolbox. My fingers closed around the handle of a wrench, and I swung it at him with all the strength I could muster. The wrench connected with his skull, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But Derek didn't even flinch. He just kept coming, his growl deepening into a roar. I turned and ran. It wasn't something I had planned. I hadn't planned for any of this. I just knew I had to get away, to put as much distance between myself and whatever Derek had become. I tore through the hallways of the hostel, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The place was deserted, everyone still asleep, oblivious to the nightmare that was unfolding. But I could hear him behind me, those heavy, dragging footsteps, the sound of metal scraping against the walls. The hostel was a maze, and I was lost in it, turning corner after corner, desperately trying to find a way out. But every door I tried was locked, every hallway seemed to lead me deeper into the bowels of the building. And all the while, Derek was getting closer. I could hear his ragged breathing, smell the stench of decay that clung to him. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with the realization that there was no escape. Finally, I found myself in the basement, a dark, damp place that reeked of mold and rot. The walls were lined with old storage crates, the floor slick with water. I stumbled forward, tripping over something in the darkness, and fell hard onto the cold concrete. I could feel him getting closer, the air growing thick with his presence. Death spear. It was a pathetic defense, but it was all I had. The door to the basement creaked open, and Derek stepped inside. His body was a grotesque parody of life, his movements jerky, unnatural. His mouth was twisted into a ghastly grin, the scalpel gleaming in his hand. I tightened my grip on the pipe, ready to fight, ready to die if it came to that. But then Derek stopped, his head cocked to one side as if listening to something I couldn't hear, and then, to my horror, he began to laugh. A wet, gurgling sound that bubbled up from deep within his throat, filling the room with its madness. It was the same laugh that had tormented me for days, the same sound that had driven me to the edge. But now, it was different, twisted, demented, as if whatever humanity Derek had once possessed was gone, replaced by something far darker. The laughter died away, and Derek took a step forward. I swung the pipe, but he caught it effortlessly, wrenching it from my grasp. His other hand shot out, grabbing me by the throat, lifting me off the ground with inhuman strength. As I struggled, gasping for air, I saw something in his eyes, something familiar. It wasn't Derek anymore. Whatever had come back from the dead wasn't him, it was me. The realization hit me like a truck. This thing, this twisted, vengeful spirit, it was the darkness that I had unleashed. It was the madness that had consumed me, given form, given life. And now, it was coming for me. Derek, or whatever he had become, leaned in close, his breath hot against my face. His grip tightened, and I felt my vision start to fade, the world closing in around me. But before the darkness claimed me, I heard a voice, soft and distant, whispering in my ear. You can't escape. You never could. I woke up on the cold, wet floor of the basement, gasping for breath, my throat escape. The darkness I had tried to run from, the madness I had tried to suppress, it was a part of me, and it was never going to let me go, but I wasn't going to let it win. Not without a fight, I pushed myself to my feet, my body aching, my mind screaming at me to give up. But I ignored it, forcing myself to move, to search the basement for something, anything, I could use to end this nightmare, and then I found it, a large, rusty blade, half buried under a pile of old crates. It was heavy, crude, but it would do the job. I hefted the blade, feeling its weight in my hands, and made my way back to the stairwell. The hostel was silent now, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on me like a physical force. But I could feel Derek, or whatever he had become, waiting for me, lurking in the shadows. I climbed the stairs, each step a struggle, each breath a battle. My mind was fractured, torn between the need to survive and the knowledge that survival might not be an option. But I had made my choice. I wasn't going to let the darkness win. Not this time. I found him in the common room, standing in the center of the carnage I had created. The bodies of Sean and Tyler lay in pools of blood, but Derek, or the thing that wore his face, was waiting for me, his eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. But I didn't falter. I tightened my grip on the blade and stepped forward, ready to end this once and for all. He moved faster than I expected, lunging at me with a speed that defied logic. I barely had time to react, swinging the blade with all my strength. The metal bit into his flesh, slicing deep, but he didn't stop. His hands were on me in an instant, dragging me to the ground, his weight crushing me as we struggled. The blade slipped from my grasp, skittering across the floor, and I felt his hands around my throat again, squeezing, crushing my nails across his eyes, anything to make him let go. His skin peeled away under my nails, revealing the raw, pulsing flesh beneath, but he didn't stop. The blade plunged into Derek's chest, the force driving it deep. I felt it tear through flesh, muscle, and bone, the vibrations traveling up my arm as I twisted the knife, desperate to end this nightmare. Derek, or the thing wearing his face, let out a guttural howl, a sound that echoed through the hostel's empty halls like a death knell. His grip on my throat loosened, just slightly, and I gasped for air, the sweet taste of oxygen filling my lungs. But the relief was short-lived. Derek's hand shot out, seizing my wrist with a grip like a vice. His eyes, once glassy and dead, now burned with a malevolent light, a reflection of the darkness that had taken root in both of us. For a moment, we were locked in a deadly stalemate, the blade buried in his chest, his hand crushing my wrist, our faces inches apart. I could smell the rot on his breath, the stench of decay and death. I could see the madness in his eyes, a mirror of my own, but then, something shifted. The light in Derek's eyes dimmed, the strength in his grip faltering. I pushed harder, driving the blade deeper, until I felt it pierce his heart. Derek's body spasmed violently, and then, with a final shuddering breath, he collapsed on top of me, his weight pinning me to the cold, blood-soaked floor. For a long time, I lay there, trapped beneath Derek's lifeless body, too exhausted to move. My ears rang with the silence that followed, the oppressive quiet after the storm. The hostel, once a place of terror and torment, now seemed dead, a tomb of horrors that had claimed too many lives. Finally, I summoned the strength to push Derek's body off me, rolling him to the side with a sickening squelch. I struggled to my feet, swaying slightly, for him to spring back to life, for the nightmare to continue. But he didn't move. He was truly dead this time. And yet, the emptiness inside me remained. I retrieved the blade, yanking it free from Derek's chest with a wet, sucking sound. I wiped it on my pant leg, though it did little to remove the blood. The weight of it in my hand was comforting, a reminder that I was still alive, still fighting. But as I looked around the room, at the bodies of Derek, Sean, and Tyler, a new fear gripped me, one that had been lurking in the back of my mind since the nightmare began. I wasn't alone. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I could feel it, another presence in the room, watching, waiting. The air was thick with it, a palpable sense of dread that coiled around my chest like a snake. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room, but there was nothing, just shadows and blood, the remnants of the slaughter I had wrought. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger, more insistent, like a whisper in the dark. And then, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like breathing. But it wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside my head. I staggered back, my mind reeling. My heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were back, louder now, more urgent. They weren't Derek's voice, or Sean's, or Tyler's. They were mine. You thought you could escape, you thought you could kill it, but the darkness is in you. I dropped the blade, clutching my head, trying to block out the voices, but they only grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it, the madness, the darkness, creeping into every to murder, to madness. It had taken root inside me, festering, growing stronger with every drop of blood I spilled, and now, it was coming for me. I backed away from Derek's body, my eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. But there was none. The hostel had become a labyrinth, a prison of my own making, and there was no way out. The whispers grew louder, more demanding, until they were a cacophony of voices in my head, all screaming the same thing: kill. 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 I stumbled, tripping over Sean's corpse, and fell to the ground, the blade clattering next to me. My vision blurred, my head spinning as the darkness closed in around me, suffocating me, drowning me in its depths. But as I lay there, on the cold, blood-soaked floor, something changed. The darkness shifted, morphed, and I saw something in it, a figure, barely discernible, but undeniably there. It was me, but it wasn't the me that I had been. It was the me that I had become, the monster, the killer, the thing that had taken over my mind and body. It was the darkness given form, a twisted reflection of everything I had tried to bury. And it was coming for me. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the blade, ready to defend myself. But the figure didn't attack. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. It didn't need to fight. It had already won. The whispers faded, replaced by a single, overwhelming thought, one that echoed through my mind, consuming everything else. You are the darkness. I dropped the blade, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure moved closer, its features becoming clearer, more defined. It was me, but distorted, its eyes hollow, its mouth twisted into a cruel smile. And then, it spoke, its voice a twisted version of my own. There is no escape. To fight, to do anything to break free. But the truth was undeniable. The darkness had always been inside me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to take over, and now, it had. The figure reached out, its hand closing around my throat, but this time, there was no struggle. I didn't fight back. I couldn't. I was already lost. As the darkness swallowed me whole, the last thing I saw was the reflection of myself in the figure's hollow eyes, lost, broken, consumed by the very thing I had tried to destroy. And then, everything went black. The hostel remained silent, the air thick with the stench of death and decay. Somewhere, in the distance, the sound of sirens grew closer, but they were too late. The nightmare was over. Or perhaps it had only just begun. As the darkness closed in, I realized that there was no escape, no salvation. The darkness was in me. It was me, and there was no end to the night.